Hi, I'm Brian Schutte. I'm the lead attorney here at Schutte Law Group. We have the opportunity to handle some fairly interesting cases sometimes. And today I'm going to share with you an interview from one of our clients who was a client in one of those interesting cases. It's a story about the cancel culture and how it can really devastate people's lives. But it's also, I think, ultimately, it's a story that's still being written, but it's ultimately a story, I think, of prevailing over very difficult circumstances. I hope you enjoy it. So introduce yourself to us, Caleb, and just tell us a little bit about you.
My name is Caleb May, and I'm a librarian, or out of work librarian now, I guess. You could call me the canceled librarian, I suppose. Been in library service as a director for about a decade. When the events of last year transpired that required me to seek legal assistance, which is where you came into the picture.
Well, we will get into that, and I want to give you an opportunity to share from the perspective of someone who's really experienced the viciousness of cancel culture. Before we get to that part, though, I want you to talk a little bit about your background. Tell us about your family, where you all live, and where you're from, and then I'll turn to another subject.
Certainly. I was born in Kansas and raised there, and had undergraduate studies at Washburn University in political science, interestingly enough, and got married to my wife, Sarah. We actually met online, eharmony.com, and she was a nurse from the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and since she was established in her career, she was able to move to Northeast Kansas just as I was finishing my degree. And unfortunately, things sometimes take a different tack, and the elections in Topeka went a different way than I had anticipated, and so I had the wrong names on my resume coming out of school. And so government work wasn't right there, ready to be had, so I was part-time on the weekends, a rural carrier associate for the Postal Service, and I also was a substitute teacher. And during my substitute teaching, one day I actually had a chance encounter with the state librarian of Kansas, who was giving a presentation to middle school students in Topeka. And she didn't know that I wasn't the librarian. I was doing some genealogy research in the library. And she came in and asked all kinds of questions, and I answered her questions the best I could. And she said, "How long have you been in this library?" I said, "Well, ma'am, I got here about 7:30 to do some genealogy research." And she was dumbfounded and introduced herself as a state librarian and said that she worked with librarians certainly all the time, and that I was as knowledgeable and perhaps had better customer service skills than a lot of the folks that she worked with. And she encouraged me to go to Emporia State University and get my master's of library science. And I came home and told Sarah and said, "You're not going to believe this." And she said, "You want to go back to school?" And that's the way that we went. And so while I was in that program, I worked at a subcontractor for Sprint cell phones, actually. And I did customer service for Sprint. And so folks would call in angry because their device was having trouble or they had a problem with their bill. And within a few short minutes, I was to make them happy, fix the problem, and sell them something. And so that probably helped just about as much as my master's program in library science at Emporia State. And so, before I knew it, here I was in my practicum at the Washburn University School of Law library, and a very good friend there, and still a dear friend, even though I very much disagree with him on cultural issues and so forth, named Andrew Evans, was a librarian there, and worked with him for the period of that practicum, and didn't know I was going to end up in public libraries. He encouraged me to get onto a listserv, and I applied for a position in Meade, Kansas, to be their director. And they had never in that library had a director with a master's in library science. And of course, I had never been a director before. And so that was a nice fit. And so I served there for 5 years, and very proud of my time there, not only in the library itself in Meade, Kansas, but also with the Southwest Kansas Library System. I served on the budget committee, and I served one term as the chairman of the system board, and also during that time served on the Friends of Kansas Libraries board, a statewide organization that encourages Friends of the Library groups, and was very proud of the fact that the Kansas Library Association awarded me the President's Award for New Librarian. I received that for my work, not only in the library in Meade, but through librarianship statewide, and also in advocacy for library services in Topeka. And by that time, the family was growing faster than the job was, and unfortunately, my wife wanted to get closer to her folks in Mississippi, and so we actually stuck a dart in a map of where would be about halfway between Topeka, Kansas and Mississippi Gulf Coast, and it was approximately Kentucky area. And so started applying to positions over here, and accepted the position at the Henderson County Public Library, and was serving there, and had been there for about 5 years when the circumstances happened. Do you want me to go into that now, or?
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us about the events of May 2020.
May 2020, of course, as we all can't forget, COVID had been around for a few months, and we were all reeling with that situation. I was in the middle of an $8.3 million, 18,000 square foot expansion of the library facility in Henderson, and renovation of the existing library. And George Floyd, unfortunately, made national headlines, and that caused a lot of the debate about race tensions and so forth to come to the surface. And occasionally, more often than I probably should, as we all have opinions, of course, I presented, as anybody might, on my personal Facebook page. It probably should have been set to friends only. I wasn't as aware at the time of all of the intricacies of settings and followers and audience and that sort of thing, but I made some personal posts that were in line with my Christian religious beliefs and conservative Republican political opinions, that race is an artificial construct, that God only recognizes one race, and that's the human race, and that also, in my personal experience, white privilege is not only false but dangerous. And there were some other related comments that I made as well.
Why don't you expand a little bit on your observation about this idea of white privilege, because it's something that we're hearing about a lot these days.
Sure. My understanding of white privilege at the time was that just by the fact that you are born with a certain amount of melanin in your skin, or lack thereof, as the case may be, you are automatically guaranteed success, and things are made easy for you. You know, the doors are open for you, and you get all the help that you need whenever you need it. And that conversely, if you have a greater amount of melanin in your skin, that you are looked down on, that you are born more impoverished, and that historically, systemically, and going forward, you have every door shut in your face and no opportunity, and everyone looks down upon you. And I'm sure that given the differences of all kinds of experience that people have throughout their lifetimes, there are people, I'm sure, that are discriminated against. But in my personal experience, being the son of a truck driver and a school teacher and grandson of farmers in rural Kansas, I was trailer trash before it was cool, you might say. We had a little spot in the country with a literal trailer house, far below the poverty line for a long time. Never received anything from anybody. I always had to work hard. I put up hay bales in the summer, worked cattle, mowed lawns, did all kinds of things, to better myself, with not even a hint, much less a guarantee that I was going to have the opportunities of higher education or the abilities to succeed in life. And despite all of those obstacles, I feel that I made something of myself, and was able to then give back to society. And I very much never saw it to be the case that I was given anything on a silver platter. And in my personal experience, I never saw anyone, because they're darker than me, looked down on or treated badly either. The few times that I did see that, I spoke up against it. And
do you question the existence of greater difficulty for people of color in our culture?
I don't doubt that that's the case. Certainly because of things in the past, like from my own experience, for example, because the people who came before me were poor and so forth. They didn't have a legacy besides the legacy of faith, really, and perhaps more down-to-earth nature. They didn't have anything to give to me either, and that's the case for probably more minorities than it is for whites, that they come into the world with perhaps not the best family situation, perhaps not the most money. There are all kinds of circumstances, and it probably is the case that there are more folks who are considered minorities that don't have perhaps as many opportunities from the beginning of life as others. But I wouldn't say that it is a 100% across the board situation, that just because of the tone of one's skin that you have benefits or automatically discriminated against.
To what do you attribute the difficulties in our culture with race in recent times?
That's part of what I think got me into hot water as well, is that because of my perspective in political science, and also going, way back in terms of slavery, actually the formation of the Republican Party. My ancestors that were in the United States at the time ended up in Kansas because that's where you went if you wanted Kansas to be a free state and to enter the Union as a free state. So my folks, going all the way back to the beginning, were always Republicans. And one of the statements that I did make on my Facebook was that the systemic nature of racism really comes from the philosophy that was prevalent in the Democratic Party in the 19th century and going forward, which was that there are categories that people are born in and categories that people stay in, and that only the select few that are picked by the elites are allowed a path forward, and that the vast majority of the folks stay in their class or in their compartment, and that is just the way it is. Womb to tomb, everybody's taken care of, but they just don't rock the boat and they don't cause problems. And so my speaking against the historic racism in the Democratic Party, the way that I saw it, I think was an additional difficulty because all of my trustees are Democrats, and there's more to a conversation like we're having where you can flesh things out and understand things than on social media. And that's just one of the difficulties of social media, that people can see words and understand things from them that may or may not necessarily be intended by the author, and that was the probably part of the circumstance in my case as well.
Well, tell us about what happened. You've talked about making some Facebook posts, and you've given us a bit of a description of the content of those posts. Tell us about the surprising reaction that you received to those posts.
Sure. It was a Wednesday afternoon, actually, shortly after the posts had been made, within a day or two. that I was conducting an interview with actually my assistant director at the time, and it was during the time of COVID, so the library was dark and locked down, and I received a call from my board president, and typically I would have just let it go in the middle of an interview, or a performance evaluation rather, but since it was my board chairman, I went ahead and answered that, and I said, "Hello, Miss Joan, how's everything going?" And she said, "We need to talk." I said, "Okay, in the middle of an evaluation right now. Can I, set you up in an hour or two?" And she said, "I'm on the way there now with Susie, who was at the time the secretary of the board, and we need to do this now." And I said, "Oh, okay." So I apologized profusely to my assistant director and went down and let them in. And I did mention to the assistant director at the time, "I don't know what's going on, but I think I'm going to the woodshed." That was the first time in nearly 5 years that the tone, is the only way I could say it, was used from my board chair with me.
Did you have any idea what the subject matter of that conversation was going to be?
No clue. Certainly when I made my comments, I wasn't trying to be provocative. It wasn't speaking on behalf of the library. It wasn't speaking about the library. It wasn't even about librarianship or anything related to my job. And so it was the furthest thing from my mind. I thought perhaps it had something to do with the expansion project, or maybe there was a budget thing. Maybe it was COVID related. It was probably the top thing in my mind that I thought was the case, because as all administrators during COVID were aware, things were changing on the ground nonstop, and there were a lot of unhappy people and so forth. But when I let Joan and Susie in and we came up to the boardroom, I then was asked, "Have you ever posted anything on Facebook?" I thought it was a really weird question. Well, yes, I've got a Facebook account. I've posted, at times, and that they wouldn't really come out and say, what it was about. They were just kind of fishing, I think, trying to see what I would say. And I said, yeah, primarily, when I do post, it's about, the kids, or, family barbecues, or scripture, and sometimes I was going to say, sometimes I'll say something about, current events or things that are going on, which would have been more in the vein of the posts in question. And Susie interrupted me at that moment and said, "Oh, this isn't scripture." And so I said, well, what's going on? And they said that they'd received complaints from patrons about Facebook posts. And within a fairly short order, I deduced which ones they were talking about, given the racial heat, I guess you might say. Of course, I already knew that they were social justice warriors, I think is the way they would see themselves, and that there was sort of a righteous indignation, I think, that was there, and that they stressed very much that they knew that I disagreed with them politically, that they had always known that, and that there was a mutual respect, and they said that I was entitled to my opinions and my views. I volunteered to remove the posts, to take them down, and they said, we're not even asking you to do that. And I said, no, I'll do it. And I took my phone right then in front of them and went and found them and deleted those posts. And so they said that they just wanted to let me know that those complaints had been made, and that the full board at some point, most likely, since the regular monthly meeting was going to be the following Thursday, I felt that it probably would have been then. They said the full board would look at everything, and there may have to be some sort of a documentation, whether that be a reprimand or what, based on the complaints that they were receiving. But Jones said that it was going to be taken step by step by step, and there was no indication. And I expressed, is my job, in jeopardy here? And the indication I received from her very much was, no, this is, something needs to be done since it has popped up in the public and people are complaining about it. But, not to worry about anything like that. Well, quickly thereafter, it spiraled and gained sort of a life of its own. The next day, I gave a Zoom statement to the staff, apologizing for any hurt feelings that may have occurred, that it wasn't my intent to cause any hurt feelings, and asking them to come to me if they had any questions or concerns or anything whatsoever, that my open door policy continued to be the case. And I did not receive a response from anybody. Not a single staff member reached back out to me. But that was sort of the initial conversation, and how I realized that something was amiss with my job, based on my posts on a religious and political nature.
So when was the first time that you came to realize that the consequences of this were going to be far more serious than what the board chair had initially suggested to you?
Shortly after that, and it was possibly 20 minutes or less. It wasn't a long thing. Talking with them in the boardroom, I went then into my office and pulled up Facebook to see, what was going on. And there were virtue signalers, I guess is the term. I could see that there were folks that had screen captured the posts and editorialized them and given all kinds of misconstrued narratives about them, and that they were being shared specifically with higher ups in the NAACP in Louisville and individuals in the library profession on Facebook. And that there were pointed calls. There was a minister, in fact, who was in the sort of, I guess you'd say, African American community in Evansville, who was actively out there calling on people to demand that I be removed from my job. And so I, within probably half an hour to an hour of just looking at this going viral, as it were, even though I had taken down the original posts, that they had been captured and were being misconstrued and spread everywhere, and people were being called to action. I'm not sure if it was, how quickly it was. It may have been the next day before I saw that there was like a change.org, I think, petition even, that was going everywhere, and people were being called to write and call the trustees, to send website notices calling for my removal and all sorts of things. I became fearful fairly shortly of physical harm to myself and my family by some of the rhetoric. In fact, in the middle of the night, I think it was on Friday night of that week, received a very thinly veiled threat from an individual in Nashville, Tennessee, who had ties to the Henderson community. And I didn't know whether there might be someone actually coming by our house to do something. So I had some concerns in that way, but primarily it was a concern for my job, as this was spiraling out of control.
So did any of the, I'm going to call them your, just sort of collectively, your detractors, the people that took offense at your post and we're trying to bring about the termination of your position there, or termination of you in that position. Did any of them approach you directly or individually?
No. In fact, I specifically reached out to some of them, tried to, and they were not receptive. I left some voicemails for the African American minister in Evansville, asking him to call me. I found out later that one of my African American employees had headed me off at the pass and had encouraged him not to speak with me. But I did reach out to the head of the local county. I'm trying to think of the terminology. Diversity committee, something of that nature. I reached out to Reverend Johnson there and had a conversation with him explaining the really misunderstanding of what was going on, and that it was being taken out of context and misconstrued. I also spoke with the head of the local NAACP chapter, and I had been, I wouldn't say necessarily super just like with anyone, in the community, heads of organizations and so forth, I had a very cordial and open relationship with her. In fact, Miss Hoda is her name. Her great-grandmother was a librarian in Henderson, and very proud of that fact, understandably. An African-American woman as a librarian of what they called at the time colored branch of the library, and a plaque had been placed in the library honoring her, and we had worked together on that. I had convinced the Friends of the Library to sponsor that and to have it placed, and she asked me in that conversation, she said, "Mr. Caleb, I know you, and you're a good person. I'm getting a lot of pressure," she said. "But I know you're a good man. What I know of you, please tell me that I'm right, and that you're a good man." I said, I'm a good man. You know me. This is being taken out of context. And I felt that it was the case that she perhaps would be on my side if it came down to people speaking and so forth. But obviously the way things ended up, the pressure came to bear from across the river and up in Louisville and perhaps elsewhere, the pressure to have a united front on that side of the spectrum, as it were.
So you reached the end of an internal process there at the library, the result of which was that they decided to terminate you at the end of your contract term, which was coming up, I think, at the end of July, or end of August.
Yes.
And of course, we regarded that as a termination. The decision not to renew is pretty much the same thing as a termination in the eyes of the law, at least. Kind of take us back to that period of time and the decision-making process that you and your wife went through to decide to pursue legal action.
Fairly quickly. I think it was the case that, well, let me back up a moment. Speaking with the board chairman, Joan, I had many conversations with her over the course of that Friday and Saturday and even Sunday, and we had planned to go together to a prayer service that was being held in Central Park sponsored by basically Black Lives Matter, for unity. And it was ended up being a nice service. Before we were going to meet there, though, she called me back and said, "I don't want to be seen with you," basically. And I was taken aback by that. Found out later that there had been a Zoom conference with some of the staff members where they were coming up with really lies about me and my performance, to come up with a pretext to basically give them something other than the Facebook post to claim that they had terminated me over, or not renewed me, as the case was. I knew by her saying she didn't want to be seen with me that something had drastically changed, and I'd spoken with some dear friends of our family who I didn't realize their son-in-law was an attorney who was affiliated with Alliance Defending Freedom, and spoke with him and was very, I won't say encouraged, but glad that there were some folks who could help in a situation like mine. So this was, I believe, after the Tuesday when the initial complaints happened, and there were people lined up out the door, to complain against me to the trustees, and they came in a few at a time, of course, because of COVID and all of that. But because of the strain on my health, I ended up having to be hospitalized. And I felt that that was very discourteous, to say the least, that they didn't just right then say, pause, basically, on the situation. We'll table this and bring it back up, at our regular meeting on Thursday at least, or perhaps even the following month's meeting, or to schedule an additional meeting to have public comment and all of these sorts of things. It would have given a lot more time to work out details regarding COVID and all of that sort of thing as well. But it was, I think that's part of the MO here as well, is to fire up passions and fast, get it all out of the road. But I think it was in the aftermath of that Tuesday meeting that we started talking in terms of legal help and so forth. It was made clear to me by Joan that there would be an opportunity to appeal, and the way she actually said that was, please appeal. So I felt a little bit hopeful about that as well, that maybe they felt that this was the catharsis or whatever that had to happen, and that perhaps there could be a gradual beginning to heal and coming back in with this appeal process. And perhaps at the time she may even have thought that may have been the case, I don't know, but certainly we saw that a different course of action was taken, and that the trustees stayed very unified in my removal.
And so after the appeal hearing, I think we, on the following day, filed the lawsuit.
That's right.
I believe that the appeal hearing, it was in mid-July, and I want to say that it was, hang on, I've got it in my calendar here. I thought it was the 9th of July.
That's possible. It would have been the second Thursday of July, I believe.
It was the 9th of July, and then we filed the lawsuit on the 10th of July.
And we had provided that to the board's attorney ahead of that, and I genuinely meant it when I spoke to the board that day, that it was the furthest thing from my desire to file a legal action, that there was a genuine olive branch from me, that what we needed was healing, not only in our library and in our community nationwide over this issue, and that this sort of redemption story of a dialogue and a way forward would be the beginning, perhaps in our own community, certainly, of, for the first time, taking seriously this issue of race, and hopefully going forward in a way of mutual respect. And it was very clear from the board that they had no intention whatsoever of entertaining someone like me as the director any longer. And they were unanimous again in reaffirming their decision to keep me on administrative leave, and then to not renew my contract at the end of the term.
So talk a little bit about what you experienced in the lawsuit. And just to frame it up, we filed the complaint, the initiating document for the lawsuit, and served it upon the defendants. We named each of the trustees individually as parties, and then also named the library entity itself. And they hired what I regard as whom I regard as a very fine attorney out of Paducah, who filed an answer. And then we made a decision to file seeking injunctive relief. And let me set that up just a little bit. Injunctive relief is where you ask a court to order parties to take a certain action. And in this case, we felt at that time that we had strong enough facts and enough legal authority on our side that we would be able to perhaps get an order from the court directing the library to reinstate you pending the outcome of the lawsuit, in the final analysis. And we filed that motion to put a lot of work into it. I know you spent a lot of time helping me with it. And then we got a response from the library, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the response that we got. And just, how did you see the content of that response, and how did you respond to that? Just kind of generally walk us through.
It changed, of course, a lot of things in this process accomplished this, but it sort of changed my perspective a little bit on human nature. I had seen in their response more deceit and just outright lies, really. The laundry list of made up or taken out of context things that they said made their decision to not renew me, that I was incapable of leadership. And the fact that I had only fired one employee out of the 33 over the course of the 5 years that I was there, very little turnover, satisfaction. Everyone had received raises due to a compensation study that I had worked on. The expansion project was going forward. All of the clear evidence, the fact that I had received year after year 100% positive results of my annual performance evaluation, all of the evidence showed that I was a competent and excellent library director without a single complaint, I might say. That's almost impossible. I think for anyone to not have a complaint from the public against me, to not have a complaint from a staff member against me, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, have nearly 5 years worth of innuendo and outright lies against me, saying that I was dangerous to children, or that I was oogling breastfeeding mothers in the children's department, that I was hitting on employees, all across the board, just a totally ridiculous set of allegations against me, saying that it would be a hostile work environment if I were to return, that somehow just my existence in the library would be such an impossible situation for anyone else on the staff, that it would never be within the realm of possibility for them to consider my coming back, even on a temporary basis, pending the full outcome. And that was just really shocking to me at the time that occurred.
So let's talk a little bit about how you conducted yourself when you were carrying out your responsibilities as director of the library with respect to legal opinions and religious views. How did you handle those thoughts on your part in carrying out your responsibilities there?
I never, to an employee or members of the public, anybody, when I was in my official capacity as the director, expressed strong opinions in any sort of way. And in fact, there are many times in your work as a librarian, it's sort of in some way like being a barkeeper. You know, people come in and they want to vent and so forth. And a lot of times people try to poke and prod and get you to say things. So I very often would say, you know, oh, I don't know about that, or, you know, is there a book I can help you find, things of that nature. And was very forgiving and understanding when other people would say, oh, F Trump, or, you know, ooh, that evil Bevan, you know, or this is ridiculous, or that's terrible, or whatever, and just sort of, you know, smile and nod and say, you know, well, that's your opinion. There are probably people who would agree with you and probably people who wouldn't. You know, is there anything I can help you with? That sort of thing is the way that I think we all have to kind of exist in society, to be polite and kind and helpful. And I think the double standard really hurt me as well. The fact that not only the board chairman, also board secretary, and others that, you know, I wasn't friends of theirs on Facebook, but I'd had people mention to me before things that they had said on their Facebook. To have the president of the library board at a, quote, women's march in pictures with folks who have genitalia hats and things of this nature, to have that be normal and not something that people would complain about. You know, there were not calls to cancel that person, but the fact that a regular, traditional, mainstream opinion is expressed by the library director on his own time, not in his official capacity, on his own personal Facebook page, the fact that that was a hill too far just was shocking to me. That double standard, and it's through the whole profession, it's through all of academia, it's through the media, it's everywhere right now. This double standard that as long as you are agreeing to toe the party line and swallow whatever the official narrative is, and parrot that official narrative, it doesn't matter what you do, you're safe, you're fine. But the moment that you say anything against the official orthodoxy, your existence has to be eliminated. Your profession has to be canceled. You have to be destroyed as a person. And we hate to see where the end result of that could be.
Did that represent, from your perspective, a change in our culture when you experienced all of that and saw how this, the response of those who are, more on the progressive side of the political spectrum to disagreement?
Certainly, personally, I didn't even know the term cancel culture when it happened to me. I learned it very quickly thereafter, and it was happening all over the place.
When you studied in your political science degree, did you study things about the First Amendment?
No, absolutely.
And what did you come away from those studies believing?
I believe that it was the American way, that if you were not violent or calling for violence, that you could have just about any opinion, that there is a respect, this kind of idea that is enshrined in our system of government, that you be treated as a human being with value and worth, regardless of who you are, where you come from, what you think, where you go to church, the way you vote, that there really should be a freedom to believe and express whatever you feel, and that is no longer the case. At least in my circumstance, it wasn't.
So how have you come to see those First Amendment protections that you believed you were under?
Virtually non-existent. I was a government employee as the director of the library, and even as a public official speaking on an issue of importance, it was part of the public dialogue. Again, I wasn't in my official capacity, and that's one of the things that they look at in terms of protection and so forth. But like I said with my board chairman, there are other library directors, library employees all over the place who would advocate all kinds of wild and crazy things, and I would fight to protect their job. I did in some cases, but all of a sudden, you say something that is based on your Christian religious views or your conservative or Republican political views, you have to be gone. And that, I think, is chilling.
And not just separated from that organization, but destroyed so that you can't even serve in another organization like it.
Correct.
So we filed the lawsuit. We then filed the motion for injunctive relief, seeking your at least temporary reinstatement. The library filed what was to you a very disturbing response filled with misrepresentations. We filed a reply to that response, and then lightning struck out of a clear blue sky when the Bennett decision was passed down by the Sixth Circuit. Can you take us back to that chapter of these events?
I think that while it was always an uphill battle, we felt that it was a flip of a coin. Maybe our odds were even a little bit better in this whole thing. That when that decision came down in Bennett, which was in Nashville, a person who had used a racial slur in a Facebook post, who was a dispatcher, I believe, who worked for the city of Nashville.
Who actually quoted someone else's use.
Right, it wasn't even her words.
Slur. They weren't originating it, they were replying to it, and they simply quoted it in their private Facebook. So.
Right, essentially what that did was put the scales completely out of whack. I think that there had been this understanding as a public employee that if you were speaking to something that was a matter of public discourse, that the scale would tip more in your favor. The rights of the employer to have to not have a hostile work environment, I guess, is what broke that scale. In Bennett, the way the Sixth Circuit decided that, essentially just, to put my words to it, destroyed any ability for any public employee to have an opinion, public at all.
That was certainly my reading of the case, because I was familiar with the case. The lead counsel on that case is a former law partner of mine and remains a close friend. And I kind of followed the case over the years, and then I read the opinion of the Sixth Circuit, and my take on that, and this becomes pertinent to your case, but my take on that was that essentially destroys the remedy that we were trying to pursue, which is the protection of the First Amendment rights of government employees under certain circumstances, and we felt like you fit into those protected circumstances. But once Bennett came down, it became clear to us that what had been maybe an uphill battle, but one that was certainly potentially winnable, it just got smashed into the dirt.
Right, so. And when Stacy Blankenship and that law firm on behalf of the library trustees then issued a supplemental response, we knew right away. They jumped right onto that, and they understood the same way we did. Yep. From the other side of the case, that a public employee could no longer basically have arguably any protections.
And that was just good lawyering.
Right.
It's what I would have done had I been on the other side of this case, and I certainly don't fault the attorneys for the library or the library from trying to take advantage of that very unfortunate legal precedent here in the Sixth Circuit. And so we made a strategic decision when that happened that we would attempt to resolve the case, and I'll share this part of it just from my perspective. We had in federal court, you can have settlement conferences that are overseen by a magistrate judge. And in this particular instance, it was Judge Brent Brennenstuhl, who is the magistrate here in the Western District. And I kind of felt like he pulled a rabbit out of a hat getting this case resolved. But we ended up settling for $45,000, and the most positive reference letter that we could get from them, which was I felt in the final analysis, a good letter.
Yeah, it spoke to just the plain facts about that I had never had a bad performance evaluation and some of the accomplishments that I had achieved while at the library.
And I was frankly a little bit surprised that that the library and its insurance company were willing to contribute as much, as $45,000, which, although, if we looked at it from the perspective of pre-Bennett, we wouldn't have even considered such a settlement. But post-Bennett, it looked pretty good. And I guess it's now been about 5 months or so since that settlement, 4 or 5 months, maybe 6. And I, as I've reflected on it, and lawyers think about their cases, I never really completely put a case away. I still feel like we made the right decision. So as you've reflected over the past several months on the decision to go ahead and resolve your case by settlement, what have your thoughts been?
I would agree, given the circumstances. It doesn't make what happened to me right, and I don't think that really anybody was taken to the woodshed too badly there. And let me just say as well that I never, wanted to beat somebody up through this whole process. Even though I hate what was done to me, I hate the way it was treated. I still don't hate the people who were involved, and that's part of just my life philosophy and my Christian faith, that I have prayed for all of those trustees, my former employees, and everyone affiliated with the library, the Friends of the Library Foundation members by name. I respect all of them and still don't wish them any ill, but what was done to me was evil. It was something that I think is worth speaking against, worth fighting against, not only for me and my circumstances, but for other people in the country in similar situations.
So let's talk a little bit kind of as we sprint toward the finish here. It's been a little less than a year now. What efforts have you made to find employment in the library management or library director field?
There are precious few positions for library director or assistant director that I've not applied for in the country, all over the place. More heavily in the Midwest and the South, I would say, since I'm from Kansas and my wife's from Mississippi. I've had very few interviews and have not had any offers of employment. So this is almost a year later, and well over 100 positions applied for, probably more like 150 actually. And not only in the neighborhood of what I was making before, but significantly less. And it's hard to know 100%, but I feel that it definitely has been a factor that I've been passed over for probably less experienced candidates because of the controversy and the sort of poison pill, I guess, that I would become. The American Library Association Facebook group in particular that had been so instrumental in canceling me, I think has continued to be instrumental in making it clear to libraries that if I'm employed, that there would be repercussions, that there would be controversy associated with my employment, and it's just very disheartening. I don't know totally where to turn next. I've been the full-time teacher of my kids from preschool up to 8th grade, and that's been a very rewarding experience to work with my 6 children. But it's been certainly a strain on the family. My wife has had to go back to work as a nurse, and we very much want to return to as close to the old normal as possible, where I'm the breadwinner and provider for the family. And it may or may not be in librarianship, which just sort of kills me, because I love the profession. I love helping people in the library, connecting people with the resources that they need, and helping them to be as enriched and encouraged as a person as possible with books and other resources that can help them along their life's journey.
What advice would you give to someone who finds himself or herself a victim of a cancel culture sort of event? What would you tell that person?
I would say, first of all, pray. Hopefully, you have a faith. That's what's gotten me through this situation to this point. I've had to rely on God very much, and I feel like the Spirit has carried me through this situation. But I would say you're not alone. To people that are going through this situation, that there are people who are silently aware of what's going on, and I think that as time goes on, they'll become more and more courageous, more willing to stand up, hopefully, even if it's small things, like saying, hold on a second, let's slow down, let's be more methodical here, let's be more fair. Fairness is not a bad thing. You're not alone. Don't give up. Pray. And we have to know that regardless of what situations occur, one of my favorite movies is Braveheart, and it's probably because I've got Scottish ancestry, but one of the things that William Wallace in that movie says is, they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. And just a sermon illustration that I'm reminded of is a situation where a child is standing up on the pew, and the dad says, sit down. And the child does, and then stands up again, and the dad says, sit down. And the child sits on the pew and then gets a smirk on their face, and the dad says, what's going on? And the child says, I'm standing up on the inside. And I think that be you, do you, hold on to truth, be true to yourself, to your faith, and whatever else happens, things will get better in this life or the next. But life's too short to give up, to give in, to not be you, to be untrue to yourself, and to in some way become something that you're not. Because let me tell you, if you sell out to who you are, you've got nothing left. You have to be you. You have to be true to yourself and to your God, and stick with your family. That would be my encouragement. Don't give up. Don't give in. Be true to yourself.
Thanks for telling your story, Caleb. Thanks for hearing Caleb's story. I've included in the notes to this links to some of the documents that were filed with the court. Everything that we're sharing is public record, and I hope it will be an encouragement to folks who are facing difficult circumstances, and give you some insight about what a tremendously challenging endeavor it is to try to stand up and defend your First Amendment rights, as in this case.